Hello, you're listening to the Sound on Sound People and Music Industry podcast with me, Sam Inglis. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Bill Putnam Jr. of Universal Audio. Welcome, Bill.
Good morning, or good evening for you.
Yes, indeed, there is a bit of a time difference, so I do appreciate very much your getting up so early in the morning to be part of this podcast. What you've achieved with Universal Audio over the last 20 or 30 years has been absolutely incredible. But of course, to understand the story of Universal Audio, we need to talk about another Bill Putnam, your father, Bill Putnam Sr., who founded the original Universal Audio. Can you tell us a little bit about your father and what you learned from him?
Oh, man. How much time we got? Because, in terms of influences on my life, he's just, there's no measure I can put against that. But, he had me later in life. He was in his 40s when I was born. So there was a whole kind of, epic of his life that I learned about kind of after the fact. The dad I grew up with, we were building radios, and he had an electronics lab. We were building model airplanes and constructing things in the backyard. So I saw like the technical side of my dad. And what I saw was someone who just never thought there was any reason he wouldn't be able to do what he wanted to do or needed to do. So and there was no kind of ego around it either. He was just like, oh, that problem needs solving. I'm just going to point in that direction and just do everything I can, whether it was, things that he needed for his recording career, or he wanted to make the first electric powered model airplane, which he was one of the first. If he set his mind at it, he would just do it. And I can only imagine that that's what it was like in the early days when he started recording. He grew up with a technical interest. He was interested in electronics, studied electronics. He was also a singer and played piano. Worked in radio in his late teens, and he was born in Danville, Illinois, Southern Illinois. Worked at a local radio station there as a chief engineer, and soon just found himself on the music side. And when the war started, World War II started, he ended up being drafted into the Army and went into the Signal Corps because of his technical abilities, and ended up on the radio side of things, but also got involved in recording tape delaying broadcasts for Armed Forces Radio. So when he came out of the war, it was like he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to get into recording. So he left Southern Illinois, moved up to Chicago, and it was just a great time to, right place, right time. There was so much amazing music happening in Chicago. Obviously, all the blues that had migrated up there, but it was also a great stop for all the big bands going between the two coasts, New York and L.A. They'd stop, and so he started recording Duke Ellington and Count Basie on top of all the blues artists that he was doing, and Sinatra. It was also a great time. It was really the birth of the independent recording studio because of all the proliferation of all the independent recording labels that happened, in the early 40s. And so he found himself just solving problems in the studio. There was no industry really around making gear like there is today. So anything that he needed for his studio, he pretty much had to fashion himself. And it was, cobbling things together from radio or from, like telephone or whatnot. And so he realized that there were a bunch of other recording studios coming into existence that had a lot of the same needs and problems that need to be solved as his. So he saw an opportunity to serve those, to create a company, Universal Audio, to serve the needs of those recording studios as well as his own. So he had a career that was on the technical side. He designed studios, he recorded and produced music, he played music. So he was really kind of all over, all aspects of this industry that we were in and we love.
And he must have had a pretty smart business brain as well, because Universal Audio became hugely successful.
Yeah, he absolutely did. I saw it. In fact, yesterday I was out on a boat in a marina that local here where we grew up, and we had a boat, and we were going by an old building, which was the old chandlery. And I remember him talking to the fellow who was starting that business, sitting in the back of the boat, doing business plans on yellow pieces of paper, and no formal training, but just great common sense. And And I saw a lot of that. And I remember him sitting with this fellow who was starting his business, and he was just kind of lining it out. And that fellow went on to really great success. So I think he did have an intuition and knack for it. But his motivation was always just to get something done. Like he was about that. He loved products. He loved things. He loved technology. So I think he was products and technology and applications first, and business second. But he definitely, and I got to say, I inherited the love of the intersection of the two as well. So I saw a lot of that in my dad. But it was just he approached it as an engineer. It was problem solving. It wasn't like high finance and fancy derivatives and whatever. He just really took a practical approach to it all.
So tell us a little bit about the early days of the second incarnation of Universal Audio, the one that we know today.
Well, I probably have to back up a little bit. So I was infected with a love of technology and electronics from my dad. And actually that turned into a desire to study physics, which I did in my undergrad. And I thought I was going to be a physics professor. And so I was on that track, and I was all ready to do what that looks like, which is go on and get advanced degrees in physics, and then, look around for a place to teach. And my life took a little bit of a sidetrack. My mom passed, which was very early for her, and it kind of devastated my father, and he was never quite the same. I actually took some time off school. I was just about to finish up my physics degree and found myself just not into it, and just no motivation. So I took time off, and I got a job. I did some digital. That's where I learned a lot of digital electronics. I worked for a fellow who started a company. He used to work for my dad at UREI, Yuri. And so I learned digital electronics and DSP, and I did love it, but I hadn't really the passion hadn't landed, And so I took off and literally traveled around. My friend turned me on to this band, the Grateful Dead, which was a real iconic 60s band that, is perpetuated and is big now as ever in their various formations. And just an amazing kind of tribe around them. And I kind of joined that, and I went out on the road and traveled around with a backpack and camped out and went from show to show. And it really changed. Like I grew up around music. Like I wouldn't have known anything different. My first live music was Duke Ellington. I was in sessions with my dad, and so music was just a part of our family. My parents were always playing music when they had friends over. It was, my brother and I would always joke about how loud they'd be sitting playing music. My dad would pull out tapes, and so it was always there. It was part of the fabric of our family, but I never realized how special it was. It was just a thing that was part of the fabric of our family. But when I went out and kind of rediscovered it on my own, it struck me as to just how important it was and how influential it could be on culture. And I also, so anyways, I came out from that experience absolutely pointed at the intersection of music, technology, and that's what I wanted to do. So I switched from physics, I went back to school, switched from physics to electrical engineering, focusing on signal processing. And because, it was still early for digital in those days. What digital was out there was kind of had a little bit of a bad name, and there was these wars going on between analog folks and digital folks. And I just knew digital could sound better. I knew digital could sound warm and have all the kind of life and vibrancy that analog, all the classic sounds that we loved. So that became it. That's what my target was. That was my North Star. Went back to school focusing on music and technology, and knew I wanted to be entrepreneurial, and didn't know what it was at that time. I looked at different things. Some friends and I looked at starting up an audio encoding, compression company. It was in the early days, and there was an audio over the internet. I actually started an internet radio company. So I was kind of playing around on that side, but it was really the stuff that took me back to my family and my legacy and the history of Universal Audio that was the thing that really turned me on. It felt like doing the other things, doing the other companies that I was looking at doing, felt like really putting business first. and deciding, and this when and it was me and my brother sitting around one evening, and the idea to restart Universal Audio came up, and just like the chills went through my body, and I just knew that that was right. It was very different than just, oh, let's just start a business to go out and do the typical thing that's happening in Silicon Valley. It was, no, this is something that is deeper than that. And, that was 27 years ago or so. So, and just like the best choice I ever made in my life. Like, I couldn't imagine what I would have done that could have ever been this satisfying or rich, or the people I get to meet, and, both the people that our customers, the artists that we get to work with, the people I get to work with are just, it was the best decision I ever made.
And the technological landscape was very different then. What sort of technological hurdles did you have to overcome to develop the first UAD system?
Well, even before that, like, I thought the analog stuff was going to be easy because I studied digital, and I don't think I ever gave analog the respect it deserved. The first hurdles were just getting analog that sounded exactly like the original, especially when it was that much harder to get the exact type componentry that was in the early LA2As at 1176, getting transformers that were wound just the way my dad had them wound back then, figuring that out. That was all, maybe 10x harder than I ever would have thought. But yeah, then digital, it's like we were really struggling. We knew we wanted to have the best emulations, and to really do a good job of emulating all the kind of nonlinearities, which is all the source of all the interesting sonics that we all love, and all the character and all the flaws. You just need a lot of processing power. So the first thing we needed to face was a world where there wasn't enough processing power to hit our level of quality. And so that was the reason we were looking for things like the UAD1, was to offload processing power. And so that was one of the big early challenges. And we just continually learned, what we know now compared to what we know then. It was just, it wasn't like, oh, we solved it, we're done. It's just been a continued learning curve that continues to this day. Every single plugin, I can say pretty authoritatively, every single plugin we put out has some new invention that the world has not yet seen, that we didn't know about, that hasn't been implemented in terms of just achieving whatever the unique challenges were for whatever piece of gear we're emulating or whatever we're trying to do.
So these days, of course, we're all very used to the idea of digital emulations of analog products. But back when you launched the first UAD system, this was kind of a new idea. And was it obvious to you then that there would be a market for plug-in emulations of classic gear like the LA2A and the 1176? Because in principle, they were kind of limited devices compared with what's possible with digital plugins.
Well, I absolutely felt that. But what I didn't know, and what people told me was that they wouldn't accept it. Like, they would never accept a digital that was trying to sound like analog, because that's impossible. And now, if you hear me say this now, you'd think that that's crazy, because it's something we're used to. But back then, I can't stress how the level of disbelief. And so I felt that that was, so I knew that there was an opportunity there, in the sense to make it, to get those sounds in a very easy to form like digital had. I mean, the original vision was making digital sound as good as analog, and making analog as effective and easy to use as digital, or kind of repeat. And so I knew it was there. I didn't know if people would believe it and accept it.
And one thing that's really helped Universal Audio stand out over the years is that you've licensed original designs and trademarks and intellectual property from the people who created that gear in the first place. Was this always a key part of your business strategy?
I think so. I mean, well, certainly, but I think that it was a conscious decision. It just seemed like the natural thing to do, and to work with the folks, because we just care that much about getting it right.
For sure. And some analog devices can be incredibly complex to emulate successfully using digital algorithms. What's been the hardest thing to emulate so far?
Let's see. So I think the first hardest thing we did, there have been, but it was when we did tape, because we weren't the first to do tape. But what you would see is folks would do some general, interesting and pleasing sounding nonlinearities that maybe were interesting sonically, and so have their place, but weren't emulating tape. The kind of the hysteresis and that you get in magnetic tape and so on. We actually spent years working on tape before we released ours. So it was several years. So tape has been one. Any time you have a significant nonlinearity that you just have to run at very high sampling rates, and then you have all those challenges as well. I'd say guitar, to really get guitar right. Again, it was something we worked on for years before we were willing to put out a product that we called an emulation of a guitar amp. The actual, everybody talks about IRs on speakers, and those are very easy to do. You stick a microphone in a speaker in a room, you capture it and run it through an IR player. So that was easy, but we knew that really wasn't the whole story. And so actually emulating what happens in a speaker, especially when you're having continued driving at very high levels, as typical of guitar amps, the speaker cone breakup, the cone cry, what happens when the motor of the speaker warms up. Like the compression and the dynamic characteristics are different after the speaker's warmed up. No one models that. So that was hard. And again, we, I think maybe sometimes set too high of a bar. And so what it means is we end up spending a lot of effort, time and money developing products before we get the first one to market. But then again, then you have something you're proud of and we can, and we know will last, right? So we don't have to redo it. Though we're constantly learning more. So we always have the tendency, we want to go back and upgrade stuff we did in the past because we just know something now we didn't know 10 years ago. But guitar, and especially getting the speaker and the right, we knew just an IR wasn't sufficient for what we wanted to do.
So although in recent years you've made quite a lot of UAD plugins available in native formats as well, the core of the UAD platform is still the SHARC processing chip. Does that limit what's possible? Does that make it harder to code things?
It's certainly, it's more challenging and I'd say limiting. So, we're obviously bringing more to native, but we're also very keen on the ones that really leverage the low latency kind of workflows and things that we can do on the SHARC we can never do on native, like unison. So there's absolutely a place for both, and that's kind of that's what we've been doing and where we're going.
I think that's one of the most striking things about the world of computer audio is that for at least 20 years, people have been telling me that DSP platforms were a dinosaur and they would die out and we'd be able to do everything natively. And yet systems like UAD have proved enduringly popular. What do you think is the reason for that? Is it fundamentally to do with latency?
That's absolutely one of them. I would say latency and workflow, and again, like when we started the company. So I heard all those things when we had U81 in the first few months we had it out. Like a great product, but you won't need it next year, right? And that was I don't know this whole years, or I don't remember how many years ago, but it was quite a few years ago I started hearing that. And there were definitely kind of religious wars about that. But at the end of the day, it's about making music. And I think, we spend more time making products that help people make music than kind of like philosophical debates. And where that's ended for us is, I think, having it, in multiple forms. And when you need low latency, you can have it. When you integrate it in the hardware, the kind of workflow, things like Unison plugins, you just couldn't do otherwise, because that's a plugin that runs right down on our hardware and integrates with the actual preamp circuitry and models the input impedance and changes it depending upon what you're doing in the plugin. So that kind of integration isn't something you always need, But when you need it and you want to actually have that analog immediacy, there's no other way to do that. So there's certainly some applications where one's better, and there's a lot of applications where it's not. But I think ultimately focusing on workflow, to me, tells me the future is devices that can work on their own, give you the knobs and so on, as well that integrate seamlessly into your computer. Thing. And to me, that's exciting. Like the kind of things we're going to be able to do now, and the kind of things we can do now are just what we dreamt of 20 years ago. But like the type of things that are possible now, just between technology and now our know-how, it's really awesome and exciting. And that's what keeps me going, is that kind of promise of what's next.
Yeah, and I guess in the early days of UAD1 and UAD2, the point of it was to provide extra processing power at mixdown because computers were not particularly powerful at that time. And as time goes on, and with the launch of the Apollos in 2012, it's kind of pivoted towards having that processing be available on the input side, and that being the key feature.
That was always the vision. Like we knew that there was, and I actually felt that, that was the vision. The first products that we mapped out were recording interfaces with DSP in it. If you go back to whiteboards and the pictures I probably have somewhere and the big Post-its on the wall, that's the product we had in mind. Apollo was it. It took us a while to get there. And so UAD1 and UAD2, and then the PCIe, and then the satellite versions of UAD2 were all steps along the way to the vision, which was getting the processing power down in the recording interface, having it available on the input, making it work just like analog, having that immediacy, having the workflow and the knobs right there.
And the first generation of Apollos used the Firewire protocol, but nearly all of the subsequent ones have been Thunderbolt devices, and you've stuck with Thunderbolt even on the latest generation of Apollos, even though quite a few other manufacturers are moving to USB 3 or audio over IP. What are the advantages of Thunderbolt for you, and do you think it will enjoy that long-term support that USB and Ethernet have?
Well, Thunderbolt for us, we were one of the first to. I think we were the first, and very far along. Even before it was Thunderbolt, it was an Intel spec that we were working on. And what we saw in that is just the ability to move, massive amount of channels over the bus with low latency. And, big tenet of what we're about is making products that work better together. And it gave us the ability to have multiple Apollos and have a bunch of busing between it. And so the type of thing that you can do there, when that is what you need, is unparalleled. And so I do believe that there's a future there. There's absolutely other formats that are absolutely as useful in other use cases. But being what it offers to us is tremendous in terms of being able to mix multi Apollo units all together into one system that just works great together.
Well, of course, by the time people are listening to this podcast, you'll be able to go out and buy one of the latest and greatest generation of Apollos, one of which is a DANTE-equipped Apollo. Now, I understand you're seeing this primarily as a product for the live sound market. Is that right?
Yeah, the first DANTE product is absolutely focused on the live sound product. We had a MADI-based Apollo back when, which was used, but DANTE just is so far superior, so much easier to use, so much more ubiquitous. That's the X16D, and it basically gives you all the UA signal processing. Essentially, turns that unit, with DANTE connected up to a live sound console. It's an outboard effects rack of UA plugins.
Do you think that DANTE and other audio over IP protocols will eventually conquer the studio world in the same way that they have the live sound world? I was reading a Mark Twain quote. Predictions are really hard, especially when they involve the future. So I try so a couple of things. So I try, yes, I have to, we have to look towards the future, and we do need to place some bets. I try not to have religious zealotry about it, So it's hard to say. I think I certainly hope so. I think that there's just a lot of benefits. There's a lot of things I can see how it would just work great across our
ecosystem. I think it could be great for the customer. I think that there's some, challenges that need to be addressed, but I do love the promise, but I'm going to probably hesitate from like completely predicting the future here.
And in the meantime, of course, we have this new generation of Apollo interfaces. Tell us a little bit about what's new and what's different compared with previous generations of Apollos.
Yeah, so, beyond features, these are the best sounding Apollos that we've ever made. And our goal was to have the most transparent and accurate monitoring of any Apollos. We've improved the noise, dynamic range, THD. Our headphone monitoring has the quality of that increased significantly. The experience and integration also, we've integrated in Apollo monitoring correction. So that's integrating in the Sonarworks technology, but into a really great workflow. So I'd say at the highest level, beyond just features, best sounding Apollos ever, and really focusing on getting the integrated workflow and together, or make improvements there.
So one of the things that the Sonarworks integration in the latest generation of Apollos makes possible is Atmos calibration and setup. Is that something that there's been a great demand for from end users?
Absolutely. Yeah, since we've introduced the first surround monitoring a while back, we've seen Apollos used a lot, and obviously lots of Atmos rooms are popping up. So one of the first problems people need to solve is get their environment, and when you have that many channels, it's just that much harder to dial everything in. So this is a really great workflow that helps with Atmos monitoring or any kind of surround configuration.
And of course, with the Sonarworks integration, you can also do frequency correction on your monitors to compensate for room acoustics.
Yeah, for the speaker and the speaker characteristics themselves and the room acoustics. And so we've integrated that in, again, into a great workflow where it's built into our console. So it's really on the monitoring section, which is where that type of technology belongs. So, and what I mean by that is rather than just running plugins in your session, where you have to remember if you're, like, say, if you're bouncing, you got to remember not to bounce through those plugins and so on. It's just an extra level of complication. And when you're about the music and the result, anything that you can do to make it easier for the customer is awesome. So, Apollo with the DSP, it runs on the DSPs, and it's controlled through the console. It's just one click, and you can monitor, and you don't have to kind of burden your session and your session management with turning it on and off and so on. So the integration's great. We offer the headphone calibration as well. And we also like to just try to, whatever we do, we like to do the best. So we've, I think, gone further than anybody else in terms of implementation, in terms of the accuracy, the EQs, the detail. I think we probably have the highest, detailed implementation of the output EQs to do that. So it's something we're really excited about.
Yeah, so I think at last it is now generally accepted that you can improve the performance of almost any monitoring system by using digital corrective EQ ahead of it. But was that a battle that was hard to win? It sort of reminds me of the battle to get plug-in emulations of hardware accepted, for example.
Absolutely, and in fact, when I went back when I was doing my PhD at Stanford at this amazing lab called CARMA, Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, that they did a lot of work on modeling musical instruments and virtual instruments, and so I was more interested in modeling audio gear. But before that, I was actually working on room and speaker correction and beamforming. So that was what my original thesis work was about. So it's great to, even though we're partnering with an awesome company, Sonarworks here, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And you're right. Like initially back then, people were, well, I don't, so many of these advancements. It's amazing how much initial friction and I don't know. People. Minds are sometimes closed as to what is possible, or if something isn't working now, it doesn't mean it's not going to work, and we're not going to figure it out and get it to be awesome in the future.
And of course, there's a related technology that Universal Audio now owns in the shape of the microphone modeling technology that was developed by Townsend Labs, originally in the Sphere L22 and now in a whole range of UA microphones and plugins. I mean, obviously, you bought that company. You must see them as a kind of natural fit into the UA ecosystem.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a natural fit, and long before I even started the company, we were talking with him, and it's just great that how it all came together, and we have it in, and what's interesting about our entire microphone line, or majority of our microphone line, is they're all modeling mics, like. And we're able to have our modeling technology, which is just core to what we do and what we're about. Really there to just offer that kind of sonic palette across all our microphone products.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, you also have another line of microphones, the UA Bock mics, which I reviewed recently, and I found them very impressive indeed, which is more harks back to the sort of high-end analog, almost boutique products that you still make, like the 1176 and the LA2A. I guess those are still equally made in your custom shop, and they're a showcase of what you might call traditional audio engineering manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. That and that's clearly the intent and where we come from. It's like we could have done a beeline right towards the digital products in the early days, because that's my background. Like my passion these days is analog electronics, but well before I really kind of fell for analog, I was all about digital. Growing up, I really liked digital because it was specific and cut and dry. It was good for my kind of engineering and science-driven mind. But, and I didn't like analog as much because it was more of an art form. And now I love analog because it is that art form. And we made a conscious decision early to start with the analog products, the LA2A and 1176. So when it came to getting into microphones, we wanted to do the exact same thing. We wanted to have those high-end, high-quality analog products alongside the digitally emulated ones. So that was clearly, what we did in the early days when we started Universal Audio, and it's just really where we come from now. So I'm really excited that we've have that same philosophy across our microphone line.
And yeah, so I mean, back when you launched the UAD1 platform, obviously, as we discussed, that was primarily a tool for mixdown. And gradually over the years, you've expanded your product portfolio, and now you can record through a UA mic into a UA Unison-enabled preamp, through a UAD, through a UA interface, and you can record into UA software, courtesy of Luna. Now, I remember the launch a few years back, and I think the reaction of some people was like, wow, this is cool, but like, do we not have enough DAWs already? Do we need another DAW? I mean, what was the motivation behind creating your own DAW?
So we certainly have a number of DAWs out there, and there's a number of ways you can take audio and commit it to a disc, right? What we don't have enough of is really highly integrated systems that make it incredibly easy for consumers to get results, customers to get results. And music makers love that flexibility. So what we focused on, a lot of what we wanted to do with Apollo in terms of ease of use and workflow and things that would just happen automatically, we really couldn't do in the context of someone else's DAW. Like it wasn't necessarily the thing that we wanted to go out and spend a lot of time and energy on, but we wanted to capture a vision, and like things like console emulation, the things we needed to do to really emulate the console in the context of a DAW weren't things we could do by just being a third-party plugin customer for other DAW manufacturers. So we absolutely needed to, our tape emulation, things we wanted to do were make it like you can, just have emulation built into the normal record transport, like those things. We just said, hey, to do this the way it should be done, we don't have a choice, So it really is about the overall system. It's about making hardware and software that's integrated, that works better together, that just does something together that you couldn't do just piecing together components. So that's really the vision. It was to fill out a vision that we had.
it feels like when you decided to do it, it turned into something possibly a little bit larger and scarier than you initially anticipated.
And I would just say I agree, except a little bit was a lot of it. It's definitely a lot bigger and a lot scarier and a lot cooler. Recently, we've Mac and Windows support and integrated it with the Volt system, and so just the types of things it can do to integrate across our various products. And the advantages that can bring to the person who's just really focused on making music is massive. So we realized to really have a set of products that could make it easy for everybody to get high quality results and get to manifest their musical vision. We needed to have that. We needed to have that hub between all our products, and you'll see more and more of that over time. And it wasn't as much, everything has to be a commercial decision because we have to run a responsible business, and we got to make enough money to be able to earn the right to do what we love next year and the year after that and the decade after that. But it really was to fulfill this vision of high quality music production in a very easy to access form.
Yeah, and I feel like with a complex package like a DAW, in many ways, it's easier to get people to start out with it than it is to get established users of other DAWs to switch. So the more that you can do to get people on board early on in their music production or audio engineering career, the better, really.
I think you're exactly right. And I suspect you'll see us focusing more on that going forward. We certainly... have you seen, we've started kind of at the higher end of the market, and as we've went from Apollo to Volt and so on, trying to bring all the goodness and the ease of use and the audio quality and the characteristics that make us proud to make a UA product down in whatever product we make. But I do think that is like a market. There's a good assessment in the market and what it takes to be ultimately successful here.
And we talked a little bit earlier about the UA guitar products and the technological challenges associated with developing those. But also, the guitar market is in some ways a very different one from the pro audio market or the consumer audio market. I mean, how hard was it to adapt your offering to what guitarists want?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a different market, but the overlap is tremendous. If you look across the user base and the folks using our recording interfaces, the majority of them are singing and playing guitar. And so there's a lot of overlap there. But, there's technical and then there's market-based challenges. Technical is to get the kind of quality we want into a form factor and a price point that's suitable for the market. So that was hard and took years. And then also to get the awareness across a market that is informed by quality, especially in guitar amps. And this is where I think we've been most successful, and I think it's where really discerning quality really matters. Or I think it matters all over the place. It's where people tend to pay more attention and be focused on it. So I think it's natural that a lot of our success has been with all our amp emulation pedals that have been, now widely used on a lot of big stages and so on, and in contexts where people thought no one would be using amp modeling pedals. And so I think, that the attention to quality is there, but it is a different market, it's a different customer, and I think we are still learning, all how to best address that customer. And so there's a long way to go, but starting with quality first is a great recipe in all cases.
Well, Universal Audio certainly has the quality element down pat. Thank you so much, Bill. It's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you. And before we go, I wonder if I could ask you one more question. I know you said it's foolish to try and predict the future in any detail, but I wonder what you're thinking about in terms of the next challenges and the next steps for Universal Audio.
Well, something I think a lot about is AI, and I'm sure it's on everybody's mind. And man, I've been through the ringer on this one, just personally and emotionally, because it's something I've been fascinated with. I did my master's was in pattern recognition and neural networks, and I stuck close to that for a while and followed it, and started my own hobby kind of side projects, making an automated accompanist. I was getting into jazz guitar, and I always wanted a bass player. And I'm like, oh, I want to program up a bass player. And, you can get the stuff that sounds like Band in the Box, and you can do the automatic composition that works for practicing and so on. But it's not like playing with real human. And I always wanted that. And I had this vision of a Mac Mini sitting behind a curtain where you could bring in a guitar player and they'd play with it, and there'd be a bass player, and you could fool them, like the musical touring test. It's like that's possible now. So it's mind blowing to me. But just in terms of like any great technical advancement, there's just, who knows what are the negative repercussions. And it's just when it comes to creativity, it's something that's so innately human. There's just something provocative and, kind of potentially terrifying about taking a human out of one part of the equation. Like, what does that mean? I got to say, a couple of years ago, as this stuff really became clear, for me, following this for so many years, it makes sense we're getting to this point. But how it happened in the last couple of years is still mind-blowing. Like, I never would have predicted it happened this fast when it finally started to happen. But it makes sense in hindsight, and with the amount of computing power and so on. But I really went into a bit of a negative tint then, like, well, why does it matter and so on? And then I realized it's not about, like, for most of us, it's not about just getting a final result. It's because we love doing it. Like, music's one of my hobbies, and probably the greatest joy is playing music with other people. It's like, that's never going to change. And so anything we're making, whether it's music or my woodworking, I do it because I love the experience. And ultimately, for companies like Universal Audio, I think we have interesting, futures, because we talk to a bunch of customers who love the experience. And ultimately, our product is the experience someone has when they make music. And I've been using AI in all sorts of my other pursuits, whether it's programming, it's one of my hobbies. Like, all my creative hobbies are becoming more fun because of AI. They're not replacing me, and they're not putting me into the place where, sure, I can press a button and get a song better than I could probably do, or most certainly. But that's been the case for a while. There's always been Spotify. I can press a button and get someone's song, or I can hire someone else to do something better than me. So that hasn't changed. But as augmenting my creative experience, it has been more fun than ever in all my hobbies and all my passions, like creative writing, coding. I'm faster and better than ever before, and so I really I'm on the optimistic side of my trajectory as to how amazing this could be. And I think if you look at how many people try to get into music making and just don't make it through that first hurdle, because it's just too hard, the technology is too complex, there's too many things to learn at once, and we just can't get to the point. If you can just get to the point, if we can just get people to the point where the fun outweighs the pain, if we can get more people, we'll have more music makers. And a world with more music makers is a world that I want to live in, And so I think ultimately the promise is there, which is to get more people making music. And yes, we will, on the negative side, we will find things where there's unintended consequences and probably, and challenges and so on. But ultimately, I think the promise of getting more people making music will just be good for the world, and good for those businesses like ours and all the others that are in it for the same reason. Like, what's great about this industry is, yeah, we have competition, but you go and we become friends with folks, and we're all out there trying to serve people who want to make music. And ultimately, the more people doing that, I think it's just going to be a more exciting industry to even be around.
Wow. Thank you, Bill. That really is an incredibly insightful and thoughtful analysis. And I have to say, I've thoroughly enjoyed the podcast making experience talking to you today.
Well, thank you, Sam. I really enjoyed it as well.
Thank you so much to my guest, Bill Putnam Jr. of Universal Audio. Thank you for listening, and be sure to check out the show notes page for this episode, where you'll find further information along with web links and details of all the other episodes. And just before you go, let me point you to the soundonsound.com/podcast website page, where you can explore what's playing on our other channels.